Hey guys, it's Bob the Builder Games here. I've just been here building and crafting things, you know, as builders usually do. It's tiring work though. Little green ghouls keep rising from beneath and stealing my shoes. And frankly, I am sick of it. Every builder knows that building without shoes is a safety violation. And let me tell you something. The big boss, Eddie Stromboli, is not too keen on safety violations. The last person that committed a safety violation on Eddie Stromboli's watch is now a goop-like substance. My favorite way of escaping the madness that is the building life is playing video games, specifically action role-playing games. And the only game that I know of that combines my love of ARPGs and building is Dark Cloud. Sony had the world in the palm of their hands with the PlayStation 1. They had Final Fantasy VII, Metal Gear Solid, and even Ape Escape. But one thing they didn't have was The Legend of Zelda. And when the PS2 came around, Dark Cloud was supposed to be PlayStation's answer to this, because there's an elf boy with a green hat. It was even supposed to be a launch title, but ended up not being released in North America until May of 2001, over a year later. Now, none of this information is relevant at all to how I got into the game. One of my favorite YouTubers slash live streamers, Pete Dorr, talked about it on his channel multiple times and even streamed himself speedrunning it, and this piqued my interest in it. But for this reason, I didn't play it until a couple of years ago, so my perspective is probably a bit different than a kid in 2001 who was expecting this to be a more Zelda-like game. But when I finally did play it, I'll tell you I wasn't disappointed with what I got. The game starts out by letting you know that the wondrous story about a young boy's adventures were found in an ancient book, and then asks the important question, do you believe in the story woven in the book? If you don't, I'm just gonna have to kick you out right now. If you're still here after this test, then your trust has been rewarded with the ability to name your character. Have you guys ever started something and then didn't come back to finish it until around a year later? Because I played the first hour of this game like a year ago intending to make a video of it, and instead made a video about my weirdo dream diary. But basically, it's a funny story. I named my character LeBron James, and forgot about it until I came back to the game. I guess I basically wanted it to be LeBron James and ran out of space, but I mean, what are you gonna do? The resemblance is uncanny. After this, you're treated to the first and most important cutscene of the game. This evil guy summons a dark genie from 400 years ago in order to use its power for war. But little does this guy know, the genie is a bit harder to handle than expected. Not only does this genie have the power to destroy the world, but he also eats this very rotund man in a horrifying fashion. Also, ignore this Final Fantasy guy in the corner because he's not there. The genie then goes on to casually annihilate half of the world in one night. Lucky for us though, just before the village was destroyed, this wizard sealed everything away. It's always smart to keep a wizard around just for this reason. Everything is sealed in something called an atla. Basically, it's just a sphere of some sort. The only person who can open these atla is the person with the atlamelia. Lucky for LeBron James, he has a kind heart. So he's entrusted with this power and must now rebuild everything that was annihilated, and then destroy the Dark Genie while being followed around by this strange wizard the entire time. A task so small even a kid could do it. The first area that has to be saved is LeBron James' hometown, Naroon Village. All that's left of it is the mayor, who tells you that the Divine Beast cave is much spookier than usual, and Divine Beast Dran, who usually watches over the cave, is acting very strange. So naturally, if you're LeBron James, you ignore all danger and start exploring the cave because you have a kind heart. The cave is split up into multiple levels, and the cool thing is that each dungeon level is randomized every time you go into it. The layout is completely changed, the chest placement is different, and the enemies are different and might drop new things. What stays constant is that 2 of the treasure chests per floor hold a map and a compass, revealing the whole dungeon layout to you and telling you where every enemy and chest is respectively. And most importantly, there is 1 enemy per floor that holds the key to the next floor. This aspect of the game is part of what makes it super addicting, because the way each floor is laid out completely changes how I play the level. Sometimes you just get the key and everything you need for the next floor immediately, and it just so happens that the exit is right there, so you could finish super fast. Sometimes the last enemy has the key and you have to backtrack to get the exit, so it takes forever. You never know how it's going to turn out or what the chests and enemies will drop. The way I play is what I like to call a speed run without actually speed running it. I try to come up with the most efficient route to get everything on the fly, but I don't actually speed run it because I don't have any actual skill at the game. But it's just fun for me to play as quickly as I can. Each floor is also just short enough to where I can go just one more floor, and then end up doing like 10 more floors and it's 4 AM. With that being said, the combat in the dungeons isn't really the strongest part of the game. It's sort of jank in places and you pretty much just end up mowing through the enemies if you play it right, but don't worry your little heads because the weapon system is incredible. Instead of leveling up your character, you level up your weapon as you destroy the enemies. Each time your weapon levels up, it has 3 stat categories that you need to take into account. First is the basic categories of attack, magic, endurance, and speed. Attack and magical power determine how much damage your weapon gives out. Endurance makes your weapon harder to break, which I'll go over more later. And speed makes you shoot or swing your weapon faster, which is kind of busted when maxed out. The other 2 categories are the elemental categories and anti-monster categories. You level these up by getting certain items called attachments that are dropped by enemies and found in chests and equipping them to your weapon. When you level your weapon up with the attachment connected to it, the attachment stats are permanently fused with your weapon. You can also choose 1 elemental per weapon, and based on how strong the chosen element is and what type of enemy you're against, you could do more damage. So for example, if you increase your plant stat, you do more damage to plant enemies. The most important thing is that you can build these weapons up into stronger weapons if you have the right combination of stats. The game tells you this by flashing the stats that aren't high enough in red. It's kind of confusing when you first play the game, but it adds another aspect to the speedrun without speedrunning thing, where I'm constantly trying to find and place the best attachments on the weapon to build it up as quickly as possible. And I love seeing what the next evolution of my weapon is and also seeing how powerful it is. On top of all of this, if your weapon hits level 5 and above and you aren't feeling it, you can change it into an attachment with 60% of the stats of the weapon. So in my case during this playthrough, my sword wasn't quite cutting the mustard compared to the slingshot I found. So I just broke it down into an attachment and put it on my slingshot to make the slingshot even stronger. Stuff like this just gives the game so much replayability for me. My only slight problem with the weapons is the previously mentioned durability. Each time you use the weapon, it loses some of its durability, and you have to repair it with a repair powder. My problem is, if the weapon hits 0, it just breaks and is gone forever. And it is very easy to miss that you're about to break a weapon. It warns you through a beeping noise, but some enemies make you lose durability quicker than others, so if you mindlessly kill an enemy without paying attention, you can just easily break the weapon. The problem is that to build a weapon all the way up, it will take the whole game, so if you accidentally break it far into the game, you're just kinda out of luck. Unless you do what I do and you just hit the reset button without saving the game. On top of the very tippy top of all of this is the water mechanic, where if the water meter runs out, you slowly die like in real life. So you have to find ponds in the dungeon to refill it or drink water bottles. This plays a pretty big role at the beginning because your meter is so small, but you can upgrade your meter, which I'll talk about later on. Now that that's out of the way, I can talk about the whole other half of the game, which makes Dark Cloud so unique and warms the heart of a builder like me. Like I mentioned before, each part of the town has been sealed in an atla that only LeBron James can open. So scattered through each dungeon, you have to find these atla and use LeBron James to open them and get the parts, buildings, and people inside. Once you leave the dungeon, you can lay out the buildings and trees however you want. Doesn't even matter how stupid it is. And you can finally release the villagers from their spherical prison cells. But they won't do anything for you until you add the correct parts to their house. Thank you for saving me from spherical hell. But I can't do much for you until you install a cabin under my house. After you add what they want, you get to watch a cutscene where the person compensates you very nicely with things such as cheese, candy, and gourds. These items are actually pretty useful. Each character's favorite food increases their defense, fruits of Eden increase their health, and most importantly, gourds increase how much water is in your water meter. I'm gourding out of my dome right now! Also, some of these cutscenes are necessary for the story to progress, such as this cat evolving into a cat girl. Eventually in each dungeon you reach a point where you need a new character to progress, because LeBron James and his kind heart can't do it all. For example, said cat girl is needed to jump over ravines. So each time you see one of these in the dungeon, you switch to the cat girl, or as I eloquently named her, Dark Genie 6, to get through. And if you weren't sure enough that she was a cat girl, she makes this noise every time you shoot. There are 6 characters in all, including the quick-witted Sosa who has the ability to fly over any gap, the all-powerful Bobby with her ability to use magic to open up different types of doors, the brave Wario who can fend off evil with his magical stick, and then there's Costanza who has a big hammer and makes a funny noise. Each character has a different weapon type, so there's multiple different weapon evolution paths you can take. Just know that the last character you ever want that to use is Costanza. His weapon has a long startup and it only hits once compared to the other weapons that hit multiple times in a much quicker fashion. It's also just jank in general to land his attack because it feels like the giant hammer has no impact at all. Lucky for us, each area makes you use the character from that area for one floor of the dungeon. So Costanza's section where you have to use his awful hammer is easily the hardest part of the game. I personally just ended up cheesing it with bombs and hoping I'd get good luck with finding the key. And eventually I did. But once you get through every floor of the dungeon, you get to fight against the dungeon boss, which is easily my least favorite part of the game. The weapon that you've been tearing through enemies with through the whole dungeon does no damage at all of a sudden, and you kind of just have to cheese every boss. Like with the first boss where you can just stun him with the bombs and hit him over and over again without retaliation. The worst one though is the Sea Witch lady because she constantly freezes you. So it feels like you can't move at all and I hate her. This is really my only huge complaint with this game. But essentially that's how the game works. You do some dungeon floors and then you build up your town and then you get some items and then you rinse and repeat. It's honestly a pretty repetitive process, but the weapon level up system, randomized dungeons, and amazing music make it so that doesn't really bother me. Seriously, the music is so good, I've been playing it throughout the whole video. The towns are super charming and funny to go through as well. On top of the rewards for completing the buildings, you can find chests that have weapon attachments and all of the various level up foods that I previously mentioned. And there's some seriously funny and head scratching interactions that happen with some of the people here. This dude offers you to take a bath with him and then gives you his used bar of soap. I'd take him up on this offer, but it looks like it's a tight squeeze. And he makes up for that by giving you some cheese. Then there's the cute Golem Gosuk who has just seen us for the first time, but thinks we'd be great friends with his human friend Toto. Seems like a total sweetheart. At least I got this 6th sword. And then there's this guy. We usually don't allow him on camera. But by far the most baffling person is the fortune teller. Usually fortune tellers will figure out your fortune by looking into a crystal ball of some sort, or even by reading your palm. Not this lady. She has her own style. I don't even understand how somebody comes up with this in the first place. The poor kid is like 12 years old, man. But hey, you've gone through almost every dungeon and now you're ready to take on the Dark Genie. If you don't want the ending spoiled, I'd stop watching here because I'm talking about all of the late game stuff. I would say it's not really a game you play for the plot, but I still wanted to warn you. So essentially, Sosa is a genius and creates a giant robot that has the ability to destroy the Dark Genie. And he forces the people in his village to pilot it through peer pressure and false promises of glory. This also isn't the first robot. That one he blew up, leaving him stranded on the moon until we found him. But he's sure that the problem was the power supply, and you get a new one by fighting against Minotaur Joe, which surprisingly is not a name I made up. And Minotaur Joe was a painful battle that I may have done wrong, but I finished it. You get the power supply and you use it on the robot and are now able to fight the genie. But joke's on you, it's not the genie and you have to do another dungeon. It turns out to actually defeat the genie, you have to go back in time to when he was conceived and kill him before he gets too powerful. This is where the Final Fantasy guy that you definitely didn't see comes into play. Throughout the whole final dungeon, you get the backstory of how the genie was conceived. The summary is that the Final Fantasy guy made a deal with a sketchy person to use a dark power to win a war that he was on the brink of losing. This dark power stayed inside of him after and was completely unleashed when his girlfriend was accidentally killed by somebody trying to assassinate him. And that dark power is the genie. So you have to go back in time to that moment and stop all of this from happening by fighting the genie. I will say that this battle is still a little bit jank, but it's still one of the better boss battles in the game for me. I actually felt like it was a fight that I didn't have to completely cheese. But you kill the genie and then stop his girlfriend from being assassinated, so it's like the genie never existed in the first place and you save the world. It's such a clean job that even Eddie Stromboli would be happy with that. And that's Dark Cloud, one of my favorite PS2 games. But that's enough messing around for me right now. I'm finished building what I was building, and now I gotta go show the boss before he turns it into a fine paste on the ground. It's a Lincoln Logs house.